File 6 of Farthest North, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskadal. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 1. Chapter 4. Farewell to Norway. I felt in a strange mood as I sat up the last night writing letters and telegrams. We had bidden farewell to our excellent pilot, Johan Haagensen, who had piloted us from Bergen, and now we were only the 13 members of the expedition, together with my secretary, Christophersen, who had accompanied us so far and was to go on with us as far as Ugor Strait. Everything was so calm and still, save for the scraping of the pen that was sending off a farewell to friends at home. All the men were asleep below. The last telegram was written, and I sent my secretary ashore with it. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when he returned, and I called Sverdrup up and 1 or 2 others. We weighed anchor and stood out of the harbor in the silence of the morning. The town still lay wrapped in sleep. Everything looked so peaceful and lovely all around, with the exception of a little stir of awakening toil on board one single steamer in the harbor. A sleepy fisherman stuck his head up out of the half-deck of his 10-oared boat, and stared at us as we steamed past the breakwater, and on the revenue cutter outside there was a man fishing in that early morning light. This last impression of Norway was just the right one for us to carry away with us. Such beneficent peace and calm, such a rest for the thoughts, no hubbub and turmoil of people with their hurrahs and salutes. The masts in the harbor, the house roofs and chimneys stood out against the cool morning sky. Just then the sun broke through the mist and smiled over the shore, rugged, bare, and weather-worn in the hazy morning, but still lovely, dotted here and there with tiny houses and boats, and all Norway lay behind it. While the Fram was slowly and quietly working her way out to sea towards our distant goal, I stood and watched the land gradually fading away on the horizon. I wonder what will happen to her and to us before we again see Norway rising up over the sea. But a fog soon came on and obscured everything. And through fog, nothing but fog, we steamed away for 4 days without stopping, until when I came on deck on the morning of the 25th of July, behold, clear weather. The sun was shining in a cloudless sky, the bright blue sea was heaving with a gentle swell. Again it was good to be a living being, and to drink in the peacefulness of the sea in long draughts. Towards noon we sighted Gooseland on Novaya Zemlya, and stood in towards it. Guns and cartridges were got ready, and we looked forward with joyful anticipation to roast goose and other game. But we had gone but a short distance when the grey woolly fog from the southeast came up and enveloped us. Again we were shut off from the world around us. It was scarcely prudent to make for land, so we set our course eastwards towards Ugor Strait. But a headwind soon compelled us to beat up under steam and sail, which we went on doing for a couple of days, plunged in a world of fog. Ugh, that endless stubborn fog of the Arctic Sea! When it lowers its curtain and shuts out the blue above and the blue below, and everything becomes a damp grey mist, day in and day out, then all the vigor and elasticity of the soul is needed to save one from being stifled in its clammy embrace. Fog and nothing but fog wherever we turn our eyes. It condenses on the rigging and drips down on every tiniest spot on deck. It lodges on your clothes and finally wets you through and through. It settles down on the mind and spirits, and everything becomes one uniform gray. On the evening of July 27th, while still fog-bound, we quite unexpectedly met with ice. A mere strip, indeed, which we easily passed through, but it boded ill. In the night we met with more, a broader strip this time, which also we passed through. But next morning I was called up with the information that there was thick old ice ahead. Well, if ice difficulties were to begin so soon, it would be a bad lookout indeed. Such are the chill surprises that the Arctic Sea has more than enough of. I dressed and was up in the crow's nest in a twinkling. The ice lay extended everywhere, as far as the eye could reach through the fog, which had lifted a little. There was no small quantity of ice, but it was tolerably open, and there was nothing for it but to be true to our watchword and "Ga fram," push onwards. For a good while we picked our way, but now it began to lie closer with large floes every here and there, and at the same time the fog grew denser, and we could not see our way at all. To go ahead in difficult ice and in a fog is not very prudent, for it is impossible to tell just where you are going, and you are apt to be set fast before you know where you are. So we had to stop and wait. But still the fog grew ever denser, while the ice did the same. Our hopes meanwhile rose and fell, but mostly the latter, I think. To encounter so much ice already in these waters, where at this time of year the sea is, as a rule, quite free from it, boded anything but good. Already at Tromsø and Vardo we had heard bad news. The White Sea, they said, had only been clear of ice a very short time, and a boat that had tried to reach Ugor Strait had had to turn back because of the ice. Neither were our anticipations of the Kara Sea altogether cheerful. What might we not expect there? For the Urania with our coal, too, this ice was a bad business, for it would be unable to make its way through unless it had found navigable water further south along the Russian coast. Just as our prospects were at their darkest, and we were preparing to seek a way back out of the ice, which kept getting ever denser, the joyful tidings came that the fog was lifting, and that clear water was visible ahead to the east on the other side of the ice. After forcing our way ahead for some hours between the heavy floes, we were once more in open water. This first bout with the ice, however, showed us plainly what an excellent ice-boat the Fram was. It was a royal pleasure to work her ahead through difficult ice. She twisted and turned like a ball on a platter. No channel between the floes so winding and awkward but she could get through it. But it is hard work for the helmsman. Hard a starboard, hard a port, steady, hard a starboard again, goes on incessantly without so much as a breathing space, and he rattles the wheel round, the sweat pours off him, and round it goes again like a spinning wheel. And the ship swings round and wriggles her way forward among the floes without touching, if there is only just an opening wide enough for her to slip through, and where there is none she drives full tilt at the ice, with her heavy plunge, runs her sloping bows up on it, treads it under her, and bursts the floes asunder. And how strong she is, too! Even when she goes full speed at a floe, not a creak, not a sound is to be heard in her. If she gives a little shake, it is all she does. On Saturday, July 29th, we again headed eastwards towards Ugor Strait, as fast as sails and steam could take us. We had open sea ahead, the weather was fine, and the wind fair. Next morning we came under the south side of Dolgøy, or Longyearbyen as the Norwegian whalers call it, where we had to stand to the northward. On reaching the north of the island we again bore eastwards. Here I descried from the crow's nest, as far as I could make out, several islands which are not given on the charts. They lay a little to the east of Longyearbyen. It was now pretty clear that the Urania had not made her way through the ice. While we were sitting in the saloon in the forenoon talking about it, a cry was heard from deck that the sloop was in sight. It was joyful news, but the joy was of no long duration. The next moment we heard she had a crow's nest on her mast, so she was doubtless a sealer. When she sighted us, she bore off to the south, probably fearing that we were a Russian warship or something equally bad, so as we had no particular interest in her, we let her go on her way in peace. Later in the day we neared Ugor Strait. We kept a sharp lookout for land ahead, but none could be seen. Hour after hour passed as we glided onwards at good speed, but still no land. Certainly it would not be high land, but nevertheless this was strange. Yes, there it lies like a low shadow over the horizon on the port bow. It is land, it is Veigat's Island. Soon we sight more of it, abaft the beam, then to the mainland on the south side of the strait. More and more of it comes in sight. It increases rapidly. All low and level land, no heights, no variety, no apparent opening for the strait ahead. Thence it stretches away to the north and south in a soft, low curve. This is the threshold of Asia's boundless plains, so different from all we have been used to. We now glided into the strait with its low rocky shores on either side. The strata of the rocks lie endways and are crumpled and broken, but on the surface everything is level and smooth. No one who travels over the flat green plains and tundras would have any idea of the mysteries and upheavals that lie hidden beneath the sword. Here once upon a time were mountains and valleys, now all worn away and washed out. We looked out for Khabarova. On the north side of the sound there was a mark. A shipwrecked sloop lay on the shore. It was a Norwegian sealer. The wreck of a smaller vessel lay by its side. On the south side was a flagstaff, and on it a red flag. Khabarova must then lie behind it. At last one or two buildings or shanties appeared behind a promontory, and soon the whole place lay exposed to view, consisting of tents and a few houses. On a little jutting-out point close by us was a large red building with white door frames of a very homelike appearance. It was indeed a Norwegian warehouse, which Sibiriakov had imported from Finnmarken. But here the water was shallow, and we had to proceed carefully for fear of running aground. We kept heaving the lead incessantly. We had 5 fathoms of water, and then 4, then not much more than we needed, and then it shelved to a little over 3 fathoms. This was rather too close work, so we stood out again a bit to wait till we got a little nearer the place before drawing in to the shore. A boat was now seen slowly approaching from the land. A man of middle height with an open kindly face and reddish beard came on board. He might have been a Norwegian from his appearance. I went to meet him and asked him in German if he was Trondheim. Yes, he was. After him there came a number of strange figures clad in heavy robes of reindeer skin, which nearly touched the deck. On their heads they wore peculiar bashlik, like caps of rain-calf skin, beneath which strongly marked bearded faces showed forth such as might well have belonged to old Norwegian Vikings. The whole scene, indeed, called up in my mind a picture of the Viking age, of expeditions to Gardarika and Bjarmeland. They were fine, stalwart-looking fellows, these Russian traders, who barter with the natives, giving them brandy in exchange for bearskins, sealskins, and other valuables, and who, when once they have a hold on a man, keep him in such a state of dependence that he can scarcely call his soul his own. Es ist eine alte Geschichte, doch wird sie immer new. Soon, too, the Samoyeds came flocking on board, pleasant-featured people of the broad Asiatic type. Of course, it was only the men who came. The first question I asked Trondheim was about the ice. He replied that Ugor Strait had been open a long while, and that he had been expecting our arrival every day since then with ever-increasing anxiety. The natives and the Russians had begun to jeer at him as time went on, and no Fram was to be seen. But now he had his revenge, and was all sunshine. He thought the state of the ice in the Kara Sea would be favorable. Some Samoyeds had said so, who had been seal hunting near the eastern entrance of the strait a day or two previously. This was not very much to build upon, certainly, but still sufficient to make us regret that we had not got there before. Then we spoke of the Urania, of which no one, of course, had seen anything. No ship had put in there for some time, except the sealing sloop we had passed in the morning. Next we inquired about the dogs, and learned that everything was all right with them. To make sure, Trondheim had purchased 40 dogs, though I had only asked for 30. 5 of these, from various mishaps, had died during their journey. 1 had been bitten to death. 2 had got hung fast and had been strangled while passing through a forest, etc., etc. 1, moreover, had been taken ill a few days before and was still on the sick list. But the remaining 34 were in good condition. We could hear them howling and barking. During this conversation we had come as near to Khabarova as we dared venture, and at 7 in the evening cast anchor in about 3 fathoms of water. Over the supper table Trondheim told us his adventures. On the way from Sopva and Ural to the Petchora, he heard that there was a dog epidemic in that locality. Consequently, he did not think it advisable to go to the Petchora as he had intended, but laid his course instead direct from Ural to Ugor Strait. Towards the end of the journey the snow had disappeared, and in company with a reindeer caravan he drove on with his dogs over the bare plain, stocks and stones and all, using the sledges none the less. The Samoyeds and natives of northern Siberia have no vehicles but sledges. The summer sledge is somewhat higher than the winter sledge, in order that it may not hang fast upon stones and stumps. As may be supposed, however, summer sledging is anything but smooth work. After supper we went ashore, and were soon on the flat beach of Khabarova, the Russians and the Samoyeds regarding us with the utmost curiosity. The first objects to attract our attention were the 2 churches. An old venerable-looking wooden shed of an oblong rectangular form, and an octagonal pavilion, not unlike many summer houses or garden pavilions that I have seen at home. How far the divergence between the 2 forms of religion was indicated in the 2 mathematical figures I am unable to say. It might be that the simplicity of the old faith was expressed in the simple 4-sided building, while the rites and ceremonies of the other were typified in the octagonal form, with its double number of corners to stumble against. Then we must go and see the monastery, Skit, as it was called, where the 6 monks had lived, or rather died, from what people said was scurvy, probably helped out by alcohol. It lay over against the new church, and resembled an ordinary low Russian timber house. The priest and his assistants were living there now, and had asked Trondheim to take up his quarters with them. Trondheim therefore invited us in, and we soon found ourselves in a couple of comfortable log-built rooms, with open fireplaces like our Norwegian payas. After this we proceeded to the dog camp, which was situated on a plain at some distance from the houses and tents. As we approached it, the howling and barking kept getting worse and worse. When a short distance off, we were surprised to see a Norwegian flag on the top of a pole. Trondheim's face beamed with joy as our eyes fell on it. It was, he said, under the same flag as our expedition that his had been undertaken. There stood the dogs tied up, making a deafening clamor. Many of them appeared to be well-bred animals, long-haired, snow-white, with upstanding ears and pointed muzzles. With their gentle, good-natured looking faces, they at once ingratiated themselves in our affections. Some of them more resembled a fox, and had shorter coats, while others were black or spotted. Evidently they were of different races, and some of them betrayed by their drooping ears a strong admixture of European blood. After having duly admired the ravenous way in which they swallowed raw fish, guignad, not without a good deal of snarling and wrangling, we took a walk inland to a lake close by in search of game, but we only found an Arctic gull with its brood. A channel had been dug from this lake to convey drinking water to Khabarova. According to what Trondheim told us, this was the work of the monks. about the only work probably they had ever taken in hand. The soil here was a soft clay, and the channel was narrow and shallow, like a roadside ditch or gutter. The work could not have been very arduous. On the hill above the lake stood the flagstaff which we had noticed on our arrival. It had been erected by the excellent Trondheim to bid us welcome, and on the flag itself, as I afterwards discovered by chance, was the word Vorwärts. Trondheim had been told that was the name of our ship, so he was not a little disappointed when he came on board to find it was Fram instead. I consoled him, however, by telling him they both meant the same thing, and that his welcome was just as well meant, whether written in German or Norwegian. Trondheim told me afterwards that he was by descent a Norwegian, his father having been a ship's captain from Trondheim, and his mother an Estonian settled at Riga. His father had been much at sea, and had died early, so the son had not learnt Norwegian. Naturally, our first and foremost object was to learn all we could about the ice in the Arctic Sea. We had determined to push on as soon as possible, but we must have the boiler put in order first, while sundry pipes and valves in the engine wanted seeing too. As it would take several days to do this, Sverdrup, Peter Henriksen, and I set out next morning in our little petroleum launch to the eastern opening of the Yugor Strait to see with our own eyes what might be the condition of the ice to the eastward. It was 28 miles thither. A quantity of ice was drifting through the strait from the east, and as there was a northerly breeze, we at once turned our course northwards to get under the lee of the north shore, where the water was more open. I had the rather thankless task of acting as helmsman and engineer at one and the same time. The boat went on like a little hero, and made about 6 knots. Everything looked bright. But alas, good fortune seldom lasts long, especially when one has to do with petroleum launches. A defect in the circulation pump soon stopped the engine, and we could only go for short distances at a time till we reached the north shore, where after 2 hours' hard work I got the engines so far in order as to be able to continue our journey to the northeast through the sound between the drifting floes. We got on pretty well, except for an interruption every now and then when the engine took it into its head to come to a standstill. It caused a great deal of merriment when the stalwart Peter turned the crank to set her off again, and the engine gave a start so as nearly to pull his arms out of joint, and upset him head over heels in the boat. Every now and then a flock of long-tailed duck, Horelda glacialis, or other birds, came whizzing by us, 1 or 2 of them invariably falling to our guns. We had kept along the Veigat shore, but now crossed over towards the south side of the strait. When about the middle of the channel, I was startled by all at once seeing the bottom grow light under us, and had nearly run the boat on a shoal of which no one knew anything. There was scarcely more than 2 or 3 feet of water, and the current ran over it like a rapid river. Shoals and sunken rocks abound there on every hand, especially on the south side of the strait, and it required great care to navigate a vessel through it. Near the eastern mouth of the strait we put into a little creek, dragged the boat up on the beach, and then taking our guns made for some high-lying land we had noticed. We tramped along over the same undulating plain land with low ridges as we had seen everywhere round the Yugor Strait. A brownish-green carpet of moss and grass spread over the plain, bestrewn with flowers of rare beauty. During the long, cold Siberian winter the snow lies in a thick mass over the tundra, but no sooner does the sun get the better of it than hosts of tiny northern flowers burst their way up through the last disappearing coating of snow, and open their modest calices, blushing in the radiant summer day that bathes the plain in its splendor. Saxifrages with large blooms, pale yellow mountain poppies, Papaver nudicale, stand in bright clusters, and here and there with bluish forget-me-nots and white cloudberry flowers. In some boggy hollows the cotton grass spreads its wavy down carpet, while in other spots small forests of bluebells softly tingle in the wind on their upright stalks. These flowers are not at all brilliant specimens, being in most cases not more than a couple of inches high. But they are all the more exquisite on that account, and in such surroundings their beauty is singularly attractive. While the eye vainly seeks for a resting place over the boundless plain, these modest blooms smile at you and take the fancy captive. After we had proceeded a short distance, we became aware of a white object sitting on a stone heap beneath a little ridge, and soon noticed more in other directions. They looked quite ghostly as they sat there silent and motionless. With the help of my field-glass I discovered that they were snow owls. We set out after them, but they took care to keep out of the range of a fowling piece. Sverdrup, however, shot one or two with his rifle. There was a great number of them. I could count as many as 8 or 10 at once. They sat motionless on tussocks of grass or stones, watching, no doubt, for lemmings, of which, judging from their tracks, there must have been quantities. We, however, did not see any. From the tops of the ridges we could see over the Kara Sea to the northeast. Everywhere ice could be descried through the telescope, far on the horizon. Ice, too, that seemed tolerably close and massive. But between it and the coast there was open water, stretching like a wide channel, as far as the eye could reach to the southeast. This was all we could make out, but it was in reality all we wanted. There seemed to be no doubt that we could make our way forward, and well satisfied, we returned to our boat. Here we lighted a fire of driftwood and made some glorious coffee. As the coffee kettle was singing over a splendid fire, and we stretched ourselves at full length on the slope by its side and smoked a quiet pipe, Sverdrup made himself thoroughly comfortable and told us one story after another. However gloomy a country might look, however desolate, if only there were plenty of driftwood on the beach, so that one could make a right good fire, the bigger the better, then his eyes would glisten with delight. That land was his Eldorado. So from that time forth he conceived a high opinion of the Siberian coast. A right good place for wintering, he called it. On our way back we ran at full speed on to a sunken rock. After a bump or two the boat slid over it, but just as she was slipping off on the other side, the propeller struck on the rock, so that the stern gave a bound into the air while the engine whizzed round at a tearing rate. It all happened in a second, before I had time to stop her. Unluckily, one screw-blade was broken off, but we drove ahead with the other as best we could. Our progress was certainly rather uneven, but for all that we managed to get on somehow. Towards morning we drove near the Fram, passing 2 Samoyeds who had drawn their boat up on an ice-floe and were looking out for seals. I wonder what they thought when they saw our tiny boat shoot by them without steam, sails, or oars. We, at all events, looked down on those poor savages with the self-satisfied compassion of Europeans. As comfortably seated, we dashed past them. But pride comes before a fall. We had not gone far when whir, 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 a fearful racket. Bits of broken steel springs whizzed past my ears, and the whole machine came to a dead stop. It was not to be moved either forwards or backwards. The vibration of the one-bladed propeller had brought the lead line little by little within the range of the fly-wheel, and all at once the whole line was drawn into the machinery and got so dreadfully entangled in it that we had to take the whole thing to pieces to get it clear once more. So we had to endure the humiliation of rowing back to our proud ship for those flesh-pots we had long been an-hungered. The net result of the day was tolerably good news about the Kara Sea, 40 birds, principally geese and long-tailed ducks, 1 seal, and a disabled boat. Amundsen and I, however, soon put this in complete repair again, but in so doing I fear I forfeited forever and a day the esteem of the Russians and the Samoyeds in these parts. Some of them had been on board in the morning and seen me hard at work in the boat in my shirt-sleeves, face and bare arms dirty with oil and other messes. They went on shore afterwards to Trondheim, and said that I could not possibly be a great person, slaving away like any other workman on board, and looking worse than a common rough. Trondheim unfortunately knew nothing that could be said in my excuse. There is no fighting against facts. In the evening some of us went on shore to try the dogs. Trondheim picked out 10 of them and harnessed them to a Samoyed sledge. No sooner were we ready, and I had taken my seat, than the team caught sight of a wretched, strange dog that had come near, and off dashed dogs, sledge, and my valuable person after the poor creature. There was a tremendous uproar. All the 10 tumbled over each other like wild wolves, biting and tearing wherever they could catch hold. Blood ran in streams, and the culprit howled pitiably, while Trondheim tore round like a madman, striking right and left with his long switch. Samoyeds and Russians came screaming from all sides. I sat passively on the sledge in the middle of it all, dumb with fright, and it was ever so long before it occurred to me that there was perhaps something for me too to do. With a horrible yell I flung myself on some of the worst fighters, got hold of them by the neck, and managed to give the culprit time to get away. Our team had got badly mixed up during the battle, and it took some time to disentangle them. At last everything was once more ready for the start. Trondheim cracked his whip and called "Purr, purr," and off we went at a wild gallop, over grass, clay, and stones, until it seemed as if they were going to carry us right across the lagoon at the mouth of the river. I kicked and pulled in with all my might, but was dragged along, and it was all that Trondheim and I with our united strength could do to stop them just as they were going into the water, although we shouted "Sas, sas," so that it echoed over the whole of Khabarova. But at last we got our team turned in another direction, and off we set again merrily at such a pace that I had enough to do to hold on. It was an extraordinary summer ride, and it gave us a high opinion of the dogs' strength, seeing how easily they drew 2 men over this, to put it mildly, bad sledging ground. We went on board again well satisfied, also the richer, by a new experience, having learnt that dog-driving, at any rate to begin with, requires much patience. Siberian dog harness is remarkably primitive. A thick rope or a strap of sailcloth passes round the animal's back and belly. This is held in its place above by a piece of cord attached to the collar. The single trace is fastened under the belly, goes back between the legs, and must often plague the animal. I was unpleasantly surprised when I noticed that, with 4 exceptions, all the dogs were castrated, and this surprise I did not conceal. But Trondheim, on his side, was at least equally astonished, and informed me that in Siberia castrated dogs are considered the best. This was a disappointment to me, as I had reckoned on my canine family increasing on the way. For the present I should just have to trust the 4 whole dogs, and Kvik, the bitch I had brought with me from home. Next day, August 1st, there was a great religious festival in Khabarova, that of St. Elias. Samoyeds from far and near had come in with their reindeer teams to celebrate the day by going to church and then getting roaring drunk. We were in need of men in the morning to help with filling the boiler with fresh water, and the tank with drinking water, but on account of this festival it was difficult to get hold of any at all. At last, by dint of promising sufficient reward, Trondheim succeeded in collecting some poor fellows who had not money enough to drink themselves as drunk as the day required of them. I was on shore in the morning, partly to arrange about the provision of water, partly to collect fossils, in which the rock here abounds, especially one rock below Sibiriakov's warehouse. I also took a walk up the hill to the west, to Trondheim's flagstaff, and looked out to the sea in that direction after the Urania. But there was nothing to be seen except an unbroken sea line. Loaded with my find, I returned to Khabarova, where I, of course, took advantage of the opportunity to see something of the festival. From early morning the women had been dressed in their finest clothes, brilliant colors, skirts with many tucks, and great colored bows at the end of plaits of hair which hung far down their backs. Before service, an old Samoyed and a comely young girl led out a lean reindeer, which was to be offered to the church, to the old church, that is to say. Even up here, as already mentioned, religious differences have found their way. Nearly all the Samoyeds in these parts belong to the old faith and attend the old church, but they go occasionally to the new one too, as far as I could make out, so as not to offend the priest and Sibiriakov, or perhaps to be surer of heaven. From what I got out of Trondheim on the subject, the chief difference between the two religions lies in the way they make the sign of the cross, or something of that sort. Today was high festival in both churches. All the Samoyeds first paid a short visit to the new church, and then immediately streamed over into the old one. The old church was for the moment without a priest, but today they had clubbed together and offered the priest of the new church 2 rubles to hold a service in the old one too. After careful consideration he agreed, and in all his priestly pomp crossed the old threshold. The air inside was so bad that I could not stand it for more than 2 minutes, so I now made my way on board again. During the afternoon the howling and screaming began, and increased as time went on. We did not need to be told that the serious part of the festival had now begun. Some of the Samoyeds tore about over the plain with their reindeer teams like furious animals. They could not sit on their sledges, but lay on them or were dragged behind them, howling. Some of my comrades went on shore and brought back anything but an edifying account of the state of things. Every single man and woman appeared to be drunk, reeling about the place. One young Samoyed in particular had made an ineffaceable impression on them. He mounted a sledge, lashed at the reindeer, and drove amuck in among the tents, over the tied-up dogs, foxes, and whatever came in his way. He himself fell off the sledge, was caught in the reins, and dragged behind, shrieking through sand and clay. Good St. Elias must be much flattered by such homage. Towards morning the howling gradually died away, and the whole town slept the loathsome sleep of the drunkard. There was not a man to be got to help with our coal-shifting the next day. Most of them slept all day after the orgy of the night. We had just to do without help, but we had not finished by evening, and I began to be impatient to get away. Precious time was passing. I had long ago given up on the Urania. We did not really need more coal. The wind had been favorable for several days. It was a south wind which was certainly blowing the ice to the northward in the Kara Sea. Sverdrup was now positive that we should be able to sail in open water all the way to the New Siberian Islands, so it was his opinion that there was no hurry for the present. But hope is a frail reed to lean on, and my expectations were not quite so bright, so I hurried things on to get away as soon as possible. At the supper table this evening King Oscar's gold medal of merit was solemnly presented to Trondheim in recognition of the great care with which he had executed his difficult commission, and the valuable assistance thereby rendered to the expedition. His honest face beamed at the sight of the beautiful medal and the bright ribbon. Next day, August 3rd, we were at last ready for a start, and the 34 dogs were brought on board in the afternoon with great noise and confusion. They were all tied up on the deck forward, and began by providing more musical entertainment than we desired. By evening the hour had come. We got up steam, everything was ready. But such a thick fog had set in that we could not see the land. Now came the moment when our last friend, Christophersen, was to leave the ship. We supplied him with the barest sufficiency of provisions, and some Ringness's ale. While this was being done, last lines were added in feverish eagerness to the letters home. Then came a last hand-clasp. Christophersen and Trondheim got into the boat, and had soon disappeared in the fog. With them went our last post. Our last link with home was broken. We were alone in the mist on the sea. It was not likely that any message from us would reach the world before we ourselves brought the news of our success or defeat. How much anxiety were those at home to suffer between now and then? It is true we might possibly be able to send letters home from the mouth of the Olenek, where, according to the agreement with Baron Toll, we were to call in for another supply of dogs, but I did not consider this probable. It was far on in the summer, and I had an instinctive feeling that the state of the ice was not so favorable as I could have wished it to be. Trondheim's narrative. Alexander Ivanovitch Trondheim has himself given an account, in the Tobolsk official newspaper, of his long and difficult journey with our dogs. The account was written by A. Krylov from Trondheim's Story. The following is a short resume. After having made the contract with Baron Toll, Trondheim was on January 28th, January 16th by Russian reckoning, already at Berezov, where there was then a Yassak meeting, and consequently a great assembly of Ostyaks and Samoyeds. Trondheim made use of this opportunity and bought 33, this ought probably to be 40, choice sledge-dogs. These he conveyed to the little country town of Musi, where he made preparations for the very long journey, passing the time in this way till April 16th. By this date he had prepared 300 pud, about 9,600 pounds, of dog provender, consisting chiefly of dried fish. For 300 rubles he engaged a Syrian named Terentiev, with a reindeer herd of 450, to convey him, his dogs, and baggage to Yugor Strait. For 3 months these two with their caravan, reindeer, drivers, dogs, women, and children, travelled through the barren tracts of northern Siberia. At first their route lay through the Ural Mountains. It was more a sort of nomadic life than a journey. They did not go straight on towards their destination, but wandered over wide tracts of country, stopping wherever it was suitable for the reindeer and where they found lichen. From the little town of Musi the expedition passed up the Voikara River to its sources, and here began the ascent of the Ural Mountains by the pass of Shola. In their crossing of the chain they tried to skirt along the foot of the mountains, climbing as little as possible. They noticed one marked contrast between the mountains in the northern and those in the southern part of the Ural chain. In the south the snow melts quickly in the lower regions and remains lying on the tops. Here in the northern Ural, on the contrary, the mountain tops are free from snow before the sun's rays penetrate into the valleys and melt it there. In some valleys, especially those closed by mountains to the south and more exposed to north winds, the snow lies the whole summer. When they had got across the Ural Mountains, they first followed the course of the river Lemva, then crossed it, and now followed a whole system of small rivers, for which even the natives have no names. At last, on May 4th, the expedition reached the river Usa, on the banks of which lay the hut of the Syrian Nikitska. This was the one inhabited spot in this enormous tract of country, and here they stopped 2 weeks to rest the reindeer and get provender for them. The country lying between the sources of the Voikara and the Usa is wooded in every direction. Between the river Usa and the river Vorkuta, and even beyond that, Trondheim and his company travelled through quite luxuriant wood. In the middle of May, as the caravan approached the tundra region, the wood got thinner and thinner, and by May 27th it was nothing but scattered underwood. After this came quite small bushes and weeds, and then at last the interminable tundra came in sight. Not to be without fuel on the tundra, they felled some dead trees and other wood, 8 sledge-loads. The day after they got out on the tundra, May 29th, the caravan set off at full speed, the Syrians being anxious to get quickly past a place where a whole herd of reindeer had perished some years before. The reindeer drivers take good note of such places, and do everything possible to avoid them, as the animals may easily be infected by gnawing the bones of their dead comrades. God help the herd that this happens to! The disease passes rapidly from animal to animal, and scores may die of it in a day. In this region there are many bogs. The lowland forms one continuous morass. Sometimes we had to walk up to the waist in water. Thus on June 5th we splashed about the whole day in water, in constant fear of the dogs catching cold. On the 6th a strong northeast wind blew, and at night the cold was so severe that 2 reindeer calves were frozen to death, and besides this 2 grown ones were carried off by wolves. The caravan had often to cross rapid rivers, where it was sometimes very difficult to find a ford. They were frequently obliged to construct a bridge with the help of tent poles and sometimes blocks of ice, and it occasionally took them a whole day to get across. By degrees their supply of wood was used up, and it was difficult to get food cooked. Few bushes were to be found. On June 17th they met a Syrian reindeer driver and trader. From him they bought 2 bottles of wine, brandy, at 70 kopecks each. It was, as is customary, a very friendly encounter, and ended with treatings on both sides. One can see a long way on the tundra. The Syrian's keen eye detects another herd or smoke from inhabited tents, 10 versts off, and a nomad who has discovered the presence of another human being, 10 or 12 versts off, never lets slip the opportunity of visiting him in his camp, having a talk, and being regaled with tea, or, in preference, brandy. The day after, June 18th, some Samoyeds who had heard of the caravan came on 4 sledges to the camp. They were entertained with tea. The conversation carried on in Samoyed was about the health of the reindeer, our journey, and the way to Yugor Strait. When the scanty news of the tundra had been well discussed, they took their departure. By the end of June, when they had got through all the ramifications of the little Ural Mountains, the time was drawing near when, according to his agreement, Trondheim was due at Yugor Strait. He was obliged to hasten the rate of travelling, which was not an easy matter, with more than 40 sledges and 450 reindeer, not counting the calves. He therefore determined to divide the caravan into 2 parts, leave the women, children, and domestic animals behind, and push forward without any baggage except the necessary food. So on June 28th, 30 sledges, tents, etc., were left with the women and children, who were to live their nomadic life as best they could. The male Syrians took 10 sledges and went on with Trondheim. At last, on July 9th, after more wanderings, they saw the sea from a high hill, and next day they reached Khabarova, where Trondheim learned that no steamer had arrived yet in Yugor Strait, nor had any sail been seen. At this time the whole shore of Yugor Strait, and all the sea within sight, was covered with ice, driven there by northerly winds. The sea was not quite open till July 22nd. Trondheim passed the time while he was waiting for the Fram in hunting and making excursions with his dogs, which were in excellent condition. He was often in the Sibiriakov colony, a meeting place for the Samoyeds of the district, who come here in considerable numbers to dispose of their wares. And it was a melancholy phase of life he saw here in this little world-forsaken colony. Every summer 2 or 3 merchants or peasant traders, generally from Pustozersk, come for the purpose of bartering with the Samoyeds, and sometimes the Syrians too for their wares, bearskins, blubber, and sealskins, reindeer skins, and such like, giving in exchange tea, sugar, flour, household utensils, etc. No transaction takes place without the drinking of brandy, for which the Samoyed has an insatiable craving. When the trader has succeeded in making a poor rich quite tipsy, he fleeces him, and buys all he wants at some ridiculous price, the result of the transaction generally being that the Samoyed is in debt to his benefactor. All the traders that come to the colony bring brandy, and one great drinking bout goes on all the summer. You can tell where much business is done by the number of brandy casks in the trader's booth. There is no police inspection, and it would be difficult to organize anything of the kind. As soon as there is snow enough for the sledges, the merchants' reindeer caravans start from the colony on their homeward journey, loaded with empty brandy casks and with the proceeds of this one-sided bartering. On July 30th, this ought to be the 29th, Trondheim saw from the shore first smoke, and soon after a steamer. There could be no doubt of its being the Fram. He went out in a little Samoyed boat to meet her, and called out in Russian that he wanted to be taken on board. From the steamer they called back asking who he was, and when they heard his name he was hauled up. On deck he met Nansen himself, in a greasy working jacket. He is still quite a young man, of middle height. Here follows a flattering description of the leader of the expedition and the state of matters on board. It is evident, he then goes on, that we have here one family, united and inspired by one idea, for the carrying out of which all labor devotedly. The hard and dirty work on board is fairly divided, no difference being made between the common sailor and the captain, or even the chief of the expedition. The doctor, too, takes his share in the general work, and this community of labor is a close bond between all on board. The existence of such relations among the ship's company made a very favorable impression on Trondheim, and this most of all, in his opinion, justified the hope that in difficult crisis the expedition would be able to hold its own. A.I. Trondheim was on board the Fram every day, breakfasting and dining there. From what he relates, the ship must be admirably built, leaving nothing whatever to be desired. The cabins are roomy and comfortably fitted up. There is an excellent library containing the classics of European literature, various musical instruments, from a beautiful grand piano to flutes and guitars, then chess, draughts, etc., all for the recreation of the company. Here follows a description of the Fram, her general equipments and commissariat. It seems to have made a great impression on him that we had no wine, brandy on board. I was told, he exclaims, that only among the medicine stores have they some 20 or 30 bottles of the best cognac, pure, highly rectified spirit. It is Nansen's opinion that brandy drinking in these northern regions is injurious, and may, if indulged in on such a difficult and dangerous voyage, have very serious consequences. He has therefore considered it expedient to supply its place by fruit and various sorts of sweets, of which there are large supplies on board. In harbor the crew spent most of the day together. In spite of community of work, each individual's duties are fixed down to the minutest detail. They all sit down to meals together, with the exception of the acting cook, whose duty they take by turns. Health and good spirits are to be read on every face. Nansen's immovable faith in a successful and happy issue to their expedition inspires the whole crew with courage and confidence. On August 3rd they shifted coal on board the Fram, from the ship's hold down to the stokehold coal bunkers. All the members of the expedition took part in this work, Nansen at their head, and they worked unitedly and cheerfully. This same day Nansen and his companions tried the dogs on shore. 8, this should be 10, were harnessed to a sledge, on which 3 persons took their places. Nansen expressed his satisfaction with the dogs, and thanked Trondheim for the good selection he had made, and for the excellent condition the animals were in. When the dogs were taken over and brought on board, Trondheim applied to Nansen for a certificate of the exact and scrupulous way in which he had fulfilled his contract. Nansen's answer was, "No, a certificate is not enough. Your duty has been done with absolute conscientiousness, and you have thereby rendered a great service to the expedition. I am commissioned to present you with a gold medal from our king in recognition of the great help you have given us." With these words Nansen handed to Trondheim a very large gold medal with a crown on it. On the obverse is the following inscription: Oscar II, King of Norway and Sweden, for the welfare of the brother nations, and on the reverse, reward for valuable service, A.I. Trondheim. Along with this, Nansen also gave Trondheim a written testimonial as to the admirable manner in which he had carried out his commission, mentioning that for this he had been rewarded with a medal. Nansen determined to weigh anchor during the night of this same day, and set sail on his long voyage without waiting for the coal sloop Urania, which he thought must have been delayed by the ice. In the evening Trondheim took leave of the whole party, with hearty wishes for the success of the expedition. Along with him, Herr Ole Christophersen, correspondent of one of the chief London newspapers, left the ship. He had accompanied Nansen from Vardo. At parting, Nansen gave them a plentiful supply of provisions, Christophersen and Trondheim having to await the arrival of the Urania, as they were to go home by her. Precisely at 12 o'clock on the night between August 4th and 5th, the signal for starting was given, and the Fram stood out to sea. On August 7th the Urania at last arrived. As I had supposed, she had been stopped by ice, but had at last got out of it uninjured. Christophersen and Trondheim were able to sail for home in her on the 11th, and reached Vardo on the 22nd, food having been very scarce during the last part of the time. The ship, which had left her home port, Brno, in May, was not provided for so long a voyage, and these last days they lived chiefly on dry biscuits, water, and weevils. End of File 6.